Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Today is an iplicit webinar day. It's 10 o'clock on the 18th of October, and today we're going to be covering off how to implement an accounting system. I'm joined today by Luke, who's from our senior business development team, Sam, who is our customer services director, so she helps manage all of our implementation team and support teams, so she'll be guiding us through today's webinar, bringing in her experience, and me. I'm Guy, I'm one of the technical solution team here at iplicit. So on to the topics for today and what we're going to be covering. And we're going to talk about a lot about common implementation problems. There's some Gartner statistics that state that 55% of all ERP implementations are not meeting their initial goals. And some of the common problems that we tend to find about implementations, probably the biggest one is poor change management. The lack of planning, lack of training as you're going through that implementation for both end users and the management team surrounding that implementation. That tends to be the most common problem about an ERP implementation, or many implementations to be fair, and with over 50% stating that's the biggest challenge. Second is insufficient functionality, getting the key and critical features defined early on. That's again another common problem about not defining all of the things that you'll need from an implementation or from the system that you are implementing, to make sure you've got those features, the key things that the new system will need to do. Getting those documented, getting those defined early on in a process and in a project is really key and critical to the success of that project. Poor governance is another one of those common implementation problems whereby the input and feedback loops that you need throughout the project as you go through things like training, implementation, project management, and the really critical point of user acceptance testing, making sure that the users who are going to be using the system when you do go live have the system doing what it is that they need to do for their part of the process, their jobs, their roles, and getting those feedback loops and ensuring that feedback gets fed back into the project and then actions can be taken before you go live is key to a successful implementation. And one of those things that, again, doesn't tend to happen as much as what it should do. And the old favourite of being over budget or behind schedule. So realistically, or setting realistic expectations and goals and timelines behind a project before you make a start, doing it at key stages within and taking into effect the things that are going on within your organization at the time of that implementation to make sure that schedules can be met, to make sure that timescales and timelines that Sam will be taking us through later on can all be met, and making sure that you're obviously on budget as you go through that project is really important. So all things that we come up against, or in our experience have come up against as part of implementations. And some of the reasons why we're in a position to talk about this here at iplicit. So a bit of background to begin with. Why we started iplicit, we thought it was time for a change. There are tens of thousands of organisations in the UK today who have outgrown or need to move from a legacy on-premise system to a cloud-based ERP system, and those customers or prospective customers that have outgrown the likes of Xeros and QuickBooks, Sages of the world, but don't have the time or the resources, or probably more importantly, the money for the sort of enterprise level systems like NetSuite, Syntax, Dynamics. We started iplicit because we think there was a big gap in that market for a finance system or for an accounting or ERP system. And the three reasons behind us starting iplicit in the first place was we want to make ERP simpler. Our premise is that we want to make software that's easy to implement. So again, that reduces the implementation timescale and just software that's easier to use. That's a big part of some of the reasons why larger implementations fail, is the fact that software is not that easy to use for those end users that are key to the success of an implementation. We also believe that customers shouldn't be held hostage by their software provider, which is a nice thought, really. We want people to use iplicit because they want to, and they like to, and they enjoy using it. which sounds strange, but that's a big part of how we develop iplicit and how we develop iplicit on an ongoing basis as well. So, for example, we update the software on a monthly basis, and the majority of the updates and enhancements we make to iplicit are all coming in and all being fed back by our customers. And we want to allow all of our customers to take advantage of those enhancements as well. And so using the software because you would like to, not because you have to. And our biggest premise is really we want to create the world's most intuitive, affordable, yet powerful ERP system. Because we strongly believe, or firmly believe, that gap in the market, we think cost-effective ERP systems need to be accessible to all mid-market organizations. And what we've done so far since our launch in January of 2019, we've won for the past 2 years the Accounting Excellence and Accounting Web Industry Awards for mid-market ERP systems. We're a finalist, the only ERP system to be a finalist in the innovation category of Accounting Excellence Awards this year. We have a 5-star out of 5 rating from our customers on Capterra, and we're also regulated by the FCA. So we've done quite a bit in that relatively short space of time. And the reason behind all of that is a lot based on the experience of the team here at iplicit. Collectively, we've implemented thousands of finance systems for customers over the years. Half of the iplicit team built and created Exchequer back in the long time ago now, back in the 80s or late 80s, I'll hasten to add. And we've built which turned into a successful mid-market ERP system. We've using that experience, and also parts of the team have also spent the last 30 years plus implementing larger enterprise level ERP systems, the likes of SAP, Progresso, Oracle, that type of thing. And we've all done that across a range of industries. And we're using that experience in not just developing iplicit and building iplicit, but also the way that we implement iplicit for our customers. And we'd like to think that nobody does it better. So the way that we've designed iplicit, because we started with effectively like a blank page, and we built iplicit from the ground up with the forefront of, or the thought in mind of making iplicit, getting customers up and running in a fraction of the time that it took us on other finance systems over the years. So taking all those frustrations of what we had when we were implementing different systems, and we've built iplicit to sort of eliminate as many of those as we can. And in doing so, it means that our average implementation time, which means the implementation project from, which includes project management, your training, your data migration, user acceptance, and all the way taking you through placing an order through to going live, takes on average about 16 days over the course of a time, not 16 consecutive days, unless you want to work weekends. So that's why we think we've got a good position, or we're in a good position to be able to present how we can implement an accounting system. And now Sam's going to take us through our top tips, so our collective top tips that we've got from that experience. And we're going to start, she's going to take us through planning for success. So over to you, Sam.
Thanks, Guy. Morning, everyone. So yeah, planning for success. I mean, at the end of the day, we've got to start with a good plan, right? So it's vital that we book in a project kickoff meeting, and generally that happens about 2 weeks after order, within 2 weeks after order. And so that starts our customer onboarding process. You have a meeting with your project manager, and during this meeting, it's gathering detailed requirements, setting expectations, understanding your wider needs around why you're moving finance systems, what are your current operational processes, are they fit for purpose still, is your business changing? So we don't just look at what you need right now, but we look about what you are going to need in the future, so that we've got a finance solution at the end of the implementation that's going to scale with you as you grow your business. So one of the main things I've asked when I've done that project meeting is, what are your critical reports that you need out of your system? Because actually, you've got to look at what you want to get out of a finance or an ERP system in order to know what to put in it. And so the clear requirements are a necessity. Now, you may well have gone through that, or part of that, through the sales process, but my team really do want to hear that from the customer's perspective so that we don't misinterpret your needs. And obviously we have internal handovers, but actually we really believe that we've got to hear that from the customer's point of view. So again, just making sure from your side, what are your clear requirements going into that meeting? There's not really any prep needed from your side. You will be asked a series of questions going through what iplicit does in its functionality, but it will be good for you to have an idea about what those clear requirements are at the beginning, so that we can kind of make the most of that initial meeting. And that really kicks off our plan. Off the back of that project meeting, we produce a project initiation document or a project plan which scopes out what was been discussed. Obviously, you may find there might need another meeting to discuss more detailed requirements if you've got a project costing requirement or maybe stock, etc. But this project plan builds at the beginning of the process, and also then is reviewed throughout the whole implementation phase. So again, it's really about understanding and getting the key requirements down, but please remember to just think about the reporting. What do you want to get out of a new ERP system is a really vital question. And then making sure we've got the right people in that meeting. So there are various stakeholders throughout the business that we believe should be part of that implementation journey. And not only to manage the project and to have input in the project, but also to manage that internal change. Engaging staff as early as you possibly can will have a huge benefit to the success of the implementation. But also it allows those people that maybe do the day-to-day operations to actually have a voice and to have an input, and gives us a valuable insight into their day-to-day processes, because we've all learned along the way that if you've got key people in a meeting but actually they don't do the day job, then when we come to do training, there are scenarios that come out of the woodwork that we hadn't thought about or hadn't been made aware of. And so at the very beginning, make sure you've got the right people in that meeting. And we organize the meeting in such a way that you can have an introduction, and we can have set times, if you like, if you want to keep the impact of the meeting to a minimum for others. But we encourage you to invite people in at key points throughout that meeting to discuss. And as I say, it may be that it's timesheets, expenses, or project costing, stock, etc. So work with that project manager to make sure that the right people are in that meeting at the right time. For us, it is about engaging everybody in your organisation and to come along on that journey. And as I say, engagement at the outset, I think, is really key. And we've had great feedback that by including everybody that's important in that project has actually made it a real success internally for them. Of course, good communication. So a finance system is not just for the finance team in most organizations these days. And so we just need to make sure that, again, good communication across the whole project team, both from our side and the customer's side, is also really important. And there's catch-up meetings at the beginning of every session. And again, those people that are engaging in those sessions will find out and have an update as to where the project is and the status of that. So if we go off on a bit of a tangent, we can always rein that back in and just make sure everybody knows where we are at any point of the project. And timescales, and that's a go live timescale, but that's also providing and making sure that you guys have got the right amount of time to implement it internally. So we try to set quite realistic expectations about what we can and can't achieve within a particular time frame. As Guy mentioned, our usual implementation takes approximately 3 months from order on average. Obviously, it can take longer, and actually in some cases we've done it in a shorter amount of time. But again, it's about that plan. And from that meeting, there is a schedule in the diary that is offered to the customer in the really early stages to see if it's realistic with our availability and versus obviously yours as well. We will take a look at what a typical 90-day plan looks like later on in the presentation, so I'll save that for then. But there is a small myth, I think, really, when changing finance systems, that you must do it at a certain point of the year. Of course, there's always preferred times in a financial year to do something, and it will be nice and clean and tidy if it was at year end or a quarter end. However, you can't underestimate the extra workload involved in those particular periods of your financial calendar. And effectively, if you're still doing your day job with added pressures of shutting down a year end, then that could affect a smooth go live. Of course, it's our preference, it's nice and clean and tidy, but in reality, you could go live at any point throughout the year. And we discuss the pros and cons throughout the project, and obviously clearly at the beginning of that implementation with the customer, just to see, what would suit them, what would suit their scenario. And it just helps the customer agree the right timescales for themselves and make sure that obviously everybody again is on board across the whole project team. Obviously, rushing an implementation and a go live to fit, say, a VAT quarter is a common thing that we come up against, and obviously we advise appropriately in terms of what that scope of the project is. If it's straightforward, it could possibly be achieved, but if you are looking at a more complex solution with lots of other outside people from the finance team being involved, then actually that's unrealistic. And although we might want to align ourselves to a VAT quarter, it isn't also the only choice you've got. And so through the implementation meeting, we do discuss that in detail, and hopefully by the end of that meeting, there's a clearer understanding of what can and can't be achieved in a particular timeline. So I think from our side, and certainly feedback from customers, is it shouldn't be rushed. It should be a really realistic expectation, and everybody needs to be on board at that early. And also clearly, again, mentioned, you've got day jobs to do, and those don't stop. And we recognise that it for some is a real juggling act, and another reason why we want to set realistic timelines in the project early. Juggling holidays and also other key milestones maybe in your organisation's calendar or financial calendar need to be taken into consideration. But you've got the day job, and we'll talk about what a typical training day might be, and we call them sessions. And after each sessions, I'm afraid you'll probably have some homework to do. And there's usually takeaway points that you and your staff need to go away and do, complete, think about before the next session. And again, you shouldn't not only just plan for being in front of us and being in front of a trainer, but actually adding on a little bit of extra time after each session for those tasks, because if you can get that done whilst everything's clear in your head, it's much easier to go into the next session having completed your homework. If the homework is not completed, quite quickly the timelines can go off kilter a little bit, the next session's impacted. And so again, it's quite vital that we try and help you guys maintain the appropriate time needed for the project, even if and when you're not in front of us. So of course you've got tasks throughout the implementation, so that's your homework, but absolutely you need to be planning for significant time for your own user acceptance testing. I cannot stress this enough. Our implementation consultants within our training schedule that we map out and draft out for you in the diary has a bulk of UAT time. And that's why we really prefer it to be a 3-month phase, because at least it gives you 2 to 3 weeks of actually using the system, putting it through its paces once it's configured, once you've had your initial training. And that is one of the key failures, is when unfortunately the customer hasn't had time to do user acceptance testing or hasn't done it thoroughly enough. That is really a massive impact to a smooth go live, and actually you end up testing the week you go live, which is stressful enough. So let's make it less stressful and plan the UAT, and actually make sure that your staff internally do complete their UAT setup. So I think, again, if it's all about the planning in advance, it means that you and your staff are able to carry on doing the day job alongside the implementation, but also trying to keep those stress levels down. It's a juggling act, but trust us, we have done this many times and it can work without getting too stressful. Next slide, please, Guy. So now we'll talk about actually understanding the roles and responsibilities of the key people in the project. And I think I mentioned the new finance system is not all isolated to the finance team. I think the majority of our customers these days have our team users, we call them, which are, senior leaders that do approvals. They want to look at reports and dashboards. So the scope of a finance system has now widened. And I think that's also the case, again, if you've got the need for timesheets and expenses or project costing or maybe stock control. It means that you've got that wider use of a finance system across your organisation. And so really it's fundamental that everybody knows their roles and responsibilities early. Again, key that they're in the meeting at the outset, but actually that they can plan amongst their day jobs when they're going to need to have input in this project. So it is about organisation, it's about planning, and it's really about communication. We do encourage all stakeholders to play that active role in that project kickoff meeting. It's not only an opportunity to just discuss requirements, but again, it's about talking about challenges, what you currently can't do with your existing solution, or blue sky thinking, I really want it to do that, can it? And it's an opportunity to really discuss some of those topics with our project manager and our consultant, so that again we can come up with the right solution that's going to tick all, if not many, of those boxes that you perhaps can't currently achieve with your current system. The other thing I think we do need to tackle, sometimes a bit of an elephant in the room in some organisations, is the fear of change. It's a real thing. We're humans at the end of the day, and it can be difficult for individuals to embrace change. They've been doing the job for a long time, they have got their own routine, they know how to use a system, they're probably doing 10 or 20 manual processes that perhaps they don't need to do moving forward, but they're comfortable and they know their job and they're good at their job and they don't need to change. And so really and truly it is engaging them as early as we possibly can and making them part of that initial meeting, giving them a slot, ensure that they're feeling listened to, and, understanding that they actually understand why the change is needed, where the business is going. And actually some of these legacy systems are all on premise, given what we've gone through in the last couple of years, that was a vital issue that most organisations had, and therefore everyone is looking to go to the cloud to have more flexible working. So, it's making them feel listened. It's also making them have the platform to understand why the change is needed and to encourage them to embrace it. So I think when you're planning that finance system change, think about who does need to be involved, but that's just not from a practical point of view about that person needs to do this, this, and this in the project. But it's also not forgetting those other key people that you probably have identified that might struggle with change. Bring them along on the journey really early, and they will be a key internal advocate, hopefully, by the end of the project, and be a real, I suppose, a beacon for what that success story looks like internally. So I think it's, again, just make sure the right people are in the meeting, but don't forget the others that also will play a key part in bringing the project to fruition. But it's not about roles and responsibilities on your side. It's the same for us. Who are we? Who's going to be part of your project? We don't believe in having absolutely everybody in a project. I think too many cooks causes a lot of problems. So generally, we will have a project manager, again, that will scope. They're seniors, they've done it a long time. We've all implemented ERP systems over the course of our careers. They know iplicit, they know how we can configure the system to meet meet solutions. And then you'll have a consultant trainer, which will do generally the configuration and the training sessions, the end user training sessions. And then we'll have a report writer specialist as well, that are obviously looking at those key critical reports that are needed for go live and your day-to-day operations. So we try to keep sort of one or two to three people on a project at any one time. Again, that allows for communication to be pretty strong between our small project team. Clearly, depending on the scope and size of the project, other people may be involved at key points throughout, but the project manager and your consultant are your constant, and they will be the ones that will liaise and ask various other people from our side to come into the project as and when needed. One of the main areas, again, is communication. I've mentioned it. So we believe that having an implementation action plan is fundamental. You've got your project scoping document that can obviously be revisited, but this is an actions log effectively, and it's managed throughout the project, and it's designed to set out who's doing what, both from your side, your homework list, for want of a better phrase, our homework list on our side. And deadlines are set, and check-in sessions pretty much happen at the beginning of every session that you have with us, to know how you're doing with your actions. Is this slipping? What do we need to do? Here's an update from our side. So we spend the first 10 to 15 minutes of all of the sessions actually just running through that action plan, so that everybody is clear about the status of things. And it gives an opportunity on both sides to say, do you know what, I'm going to struggle to do that. Can we move that back? And then talking about any impact, if anything. So for us, it's fundamental that we keep a hold of that actions list. We send that out to customers. We check in on a regular basis, and that really does keep the project on track. It sets expectations of things early if we're not going to be able to achieve something in the given deadline. And again, it just means from our experience, that's the best way to manage the project. Well, you know, a wider project management, if you like, but also those fundamental detailed actions is something that we do not lose track of. Next slide, please, Guy. So we've talked about the plan. We've talked about key responsibilities. Generally, we will have configured an environment for you off the back of our initial conversations, and we'd be in a position where we can actually start to think about the end user training. So how does a person use iplicit? That's the navigation. That might be almost testing, I think, in some cases, the setup that we've put in place. So the training sometimes becomes a workshop, because we are really clear at the outset that we must make that environment set up and configure along the way, so that by the end of your user acceptance testing, you have pretty much a live environment ready to go. And so you might be lucky to have a project lead from your side, but they can't do all of the jobs that the project needs and requires. And so, you know, the project will impact people's workload. There is no doubt about that, and we're very clear from the outset. So the training schedule is booked in at the beginning. Teams invites are sent out to all of the people involved, and not everybody in the project needs to be involved in each session. So it's really agreed between both parties of who needs to be involved in what, and what topics are going to be covered in which sessions. And we recommend that generally they take about sort of 2 to 3 hours most, but we do recommend, as I say, that staff do also book out maybe up to an hour after every session, just to recap, just to gain some thought, absorb things that have been told, do the homework if possible, or plan at least the homework. We find that training on customers' data is also the best way forward. We're not training on any demo data. So there's an initial data migration of static records, and then, you know, we encourage the users to be processing transactions in that initial environment so that they're testing it, they're breaking it. We're working with them to tweak things along the way for different scenarios. So as I say, it's really about making sure that you've got the right people in the right sessions. It's about making sure they've got the right time at the end of the sessions to do things that maybe they might be asked to do. We obviously ensure that we have the ability to make changes and to be flexible in that plan. So yes, there's contingency built in, and that might be because there could be some topics that need covering again, or we might need to reconsider a plan we had at the very beginning. A plan is not always right, perfect first time, so we might need to adapt that. So having a contingency built in to allow for those little bumps in the road or little changes off course will just mean, again, keeps the stress levels low, everyone knows what they need to do, and again, having that recap at the beginning of every session really ensures that people know what they're going to be covering. There are varying capabilities as well within an organisation, and so the trainer will allow for that. So there could be topics that do need to be recapped later on, and again, there's a little contingency in the budget that we always keep back for such eventualities. As I said, some training sessions do become workshops, and configuration happens during that session because it's a bit of a two-way. Well, that's not quite working. Okay, if we changed it this way, could that then suit? Yes, it does. So it's very much a two-way thing. Although it's training, it does become a really collaborative workshop session. I think that does encourage users' input and adoption of the process because, again, they feel engaged throughout the whole process. Next slide, please, Guy. So your data. So big topic, data. First and foremost is what can you get out of your existing system? And it might sound really obvious and it might sound really straightforward, but I can assure you with the number of systems we've moved people from to iplicit, too many assumptions have been made early that the data would just be easy to get out. No one's tried it actually. And when it comes down to it, there could be formats incorrect. The system might hold data in a particular different way. There are lots of things to consider. And as I say, we step through and help you and point you in the right direction of things to consider. But, in terms of first and foremost, why are you moving from a system? What data can you get out of that system to migrate? Reports, make sure you've got the right reports that produce the right information that you need to move your data over to a new system. And we talked about earlier around the fact that we train on your data, and that's the static records I spoke about. So your chart of account structure, your customers, suppliers, are there any extra analysis levels that you currently use, or have we identified in the project kickoff meeting that you need a couple of other levels, and they might be our custom attributes that we need to create that you don't currently have at the moment. And so we really just need to make sure we have a good conversation about what data you want to bring over. Now, some customers have inherited systems, the legacy system, and it's not set up in the way that they would want it to. The chart of account structure has got a little bit messy, and there are codes that are do not use and ignore, and it's a really complex web of numbers that actually probably don't make any sense now and won't be fit for purpose as your organization moves on. And so again, we encourage that that is exported, that there's some thought process put around your structure from a reporting point of view. What do you want to get out of your management accounts, and how can we achieve that with a nice clean chart of account structure? However, cleaning data, which obviously we recommend, and 9 times out of 10 most customers want to do that, we do need to think about when you're going to come and put your opening balances in. If you've gone and tidied up your chart of accounts, but you've got a trial balance and no chart of account code to post them to, again, some thought needs to go into that early so it's not a shock at the end. And we step through the customers and say, remember this, remember that, just so that when we come to do your opening TB, everything is ready, or if it needs to be mapped, it's done so earlier on in the project, so there are no surprises. And the same thing goes for your customers and supplier records. Okay, you might have customers and suppliers you've been using for 10 years. Do you need those in the new system? So depending on the different scenario and the different industry, that you'll have a cut-off and say, okay, well, I might not want those customers from 2021. Anything from then on, I'm moving over. Great. But again, if they've got a balance on them, because you've got a bad debt or something along those lines, is it something that you've got to make sure that you've tidied up, either in your legacy system, which we advise, so you're not bringing over any unnecessary records just for an opening balance that you're probably going to write off next year. So try and tidy things up in the current system as best you can, so you're only bringing over the relevant data. Same with projects, same with stock. When there are records that are used across the wider organisation, again, engaging the right people to identify the relevant codes that come over. So there's a good conversation. Our experience, for want of a better phrase, will obviously help you understand the pitfalls to avoid, I think, when it comes to your static information and also opening balances. Opening balances can be really straightforward. And you've got various options for those. So it could be that you've got £5,000 as a balance on a customer record and made up of 5 invoices. So of course the most straightforward one is I'll put an invoice in for £5,000. Not ideal if customers then pay their individual invoices that they've received. So I think our preferred is that we would have an invoice in for each invoice matching in your legacy system, but just to balance, because we don't need it populating the P&L because it already is in your current system. So it goes to a suspense account. That's the really straightforward, and there's pros and cons around that, but it really is the tried and tested method. You could put period balances in your TB. So you've got a little bit of depending on when you go live, you've got then a whole year's worth of balances that you can pull through in your management accounts. So again, the project manager would step through all of those different scenarios and you will agree with them what fits. Please try not to overcomplicate. And everyone gets very excited and a bit carried away with data, but please don't underestimate the time it might take to get that data across. Importing from our side, pretty straightforward. We can show you guys how to do that. But it's trying to avoid being overcomplicated. Try not to make too many changes if it's going to affect what your opening balance situation is going to be like, and that there's going to have to be hundreds of mapping files to get to where you need to get to. So again, along the way, we will advise, actually, that might be a little bit overcomplicated, and again, agree the right solution and the right level of information that needs to come over. So that's all in your live system, because clearly the time it takes to get the data out, I think 9 times out of 10 is underestimated. It will take you probably double that. But then the danger is that everyone just goes, oh, I haven't got time. I've got my day job. I've got this, I've got that. I'm just going to chuck it in. Again, that also doesn't help, because what you've done is you've replicated your legacy system with a brand new system, and you've just brought over some of the mess that you were hoping to avoid. So just with a planned, scheduled training, right timeline, you can achieve a nice, clean new system without it being too complicated. Next slide, please, Guy. So this is just a visual aid around what our typical 30, 60, 90-day plan looks like. I've already recapped on most of this, actually. So system configuration starts off after our project kickoff meeting in an environment. The data prep is then what I've suggested is we do that initial data import. Doesn't have to be your final customers and supplier lists or anything like that, but it just gives a snapshot of data so that that's meaningful to you and your staff when you're using iplicit. And so those configurations then are tested during the training, and we'll have gathered your initial report writing requirements as well. So that may start to be looked at. Obviously, you need a little bit of test data in the system to be able to run reports and to be able to test them yourself. So that tends to happen going into the sort of 60-day mark, sort of month 2. A bit of configuration may need to be tweaked along the way in that middle month. And then probably towards the end of that middle month, we would encourage that user acceptance testing, at least 2 weeks. Not consecutive, but at least a good chunk of your time you need to put the system through its paces, and test things, and test even down to stationary layouts. That's one of the really biggest things that people forget to say, oh yeah, I like that invoice layout and that remittance advice is great. Guaranteed someone goes live, oh, that's not what I wanted. That's not what I wanted. So again, we encourage the user acceptance testing. We have a sign-off document to go, yes, I've done that. Yes, I've done that. Yes, I've done my homework. It's not too arduous, but it's really, really key to a smooth go live. Then we move into month 3. Again, we'll have tweaked the configuration. We may have tweaked the reporting to make sure that it's going to be pulling through what you guys need. And then we'll finish off on some of the other end user training pieces. So that might be recapping. It might be doing some processes that are maybe monthly or annually. And it's just, again, a final recap so everybody knows how to use iplicit for the job that they need it to do. And then the month of go live will put your opening balances in. So you'll have another environment created, which will be your live, and the opening balances will be imported. And generally, we will handhold you through that first couple of weeks during various check-in sessions to make sure that everybody is using it. Obviously, typically there'll be a scenario we haven't even thought about, all of our plan and organisation, etc. So we will be there during the month of go live to troubleshoot and to handhold the different scenarios. And then after go live, you've done your first management pack reporting. Again, is another sign off of, yep, we've got the system up and running and live, and it's given us what we need. Then there'll be a conversation around any phase 2 or 3. Maybe people do want to just go live with core financials and then bring in some other implementations or maybe third-party APIs afterwards. So there's a little roundup of that project and what we can improve on if we need to, and what's the plan for the next phases of the implementation journey with you guys. Next slide, please, Guy. So I've mentioned we've got an implementation action plan which becomes our Bible, and it's our action to-do list. It keeps us all on track. But I think it's also important, again, to have regular, maybe even monthly, just check-ins with the project manager about these key things here. So, the schedule, is everybody still on board with the plan? Are timelines still accurate? Just keep questioning it. Are we where we need to be right now? And if we're a month or a week, hopefully not a month or two behind, a week or two behind, then fine. Can we adapt it? Can we get it back on track? So it is those detailed actions, but we really do also make sure that people are looking at the overall project from above and just making sure that things are not slipping through the net. The actions clearly, allow for changes, manage the actions and set expectations is pretty much what we do every session. But again, take a step back. Where are we with our actions? Have you got 40 actions still outstanding and we've got 2 weeks to go live? Is that achievable? Okay, let's have a conversation about it. The budget, at the end of the day, you guys sign up for an amount of hours and we will split that accordingly, and the project manager will keep an eye on those budgeted hours and certainly alert way in advance if we think we're going over, but actually it might be that we can bring it back on track. We generally don't go over on hours. We really try not to, and if there is an incident that we do, we communicate with the customer really early, and they then have a choice. Do we do that? Do we do this? And again, it's generally about the fact that training's taken a bit longer. You haven't done your UAT, we need to recap on this. Actually, we've completely changed the way we want to do the projects because we've spoken to somebody that wasn't in the meeting at the very beginning and they've told us that's actually not how it will work because of various reasons internally. So we have to change the whole plan. These things happen, right? So, we do keep an eye on the budgeted hours and we alert you. And again, from your side, you keep an eye on it's costing you internally for people's time. Risks, of course, there may well be risks that were identified at the beginning, and we make that very clear at the outset. So, have we resolved those risks with the solution that we're working on? If not, are you happy to accept certain risks that actually that is the way it is and no system will be able to help you with that? And so it's accepted, it's noted, we move on. But actually, what other actions are still needed to address those risks that were identified? So again, it's just a bit overarching. Where are we with any risks and issues that were identified? And then the benefits, what is the reason you were changing finance system in the first place? Have they been addressed, or are they being addressed with the solution that we're putting in place? Are they being delivered by the training that's happening? Review the reasons for change at least once a month and make sure that we are doing what the original plan was. And again, making sure everybody is clear and everyone is happy that we are moving in the right direction. Next slide, please, Guy. So really, just to recap, we've spoken about the sort of 6 main areas to watch out for when you're looking for, a successful implementation. Yeah, you don't want the pain of moving systems, not in this day and age, not with cloud being the way it is. It should be really straightforward. And so the first point is scope creep. Okay, the first point to try and avoid is that delightful scope creep. And it affects budget, it affects the day job, it affects solution design. And we do find the main reasons for that. Number one is bad data. That is an absolute time thief. We may, you may well not have the means or the personnel internally to deal with data. Not everyone's an Excel whiz, and we recognise that. So again, there's some things we can help with to make sure that the data isn't as painful as it possibly could be. Overcomplicating the design and setup. Again, we all have this wonderful blue sky, this is what we want. But, let's not overcomplicate the setup. And not engaging the right people early to understand all the requirements, because you'll get those little surprises that come out from training, I guarantee it. So scope creep is a real thing, and we try and avoid it with the things that we've talked about this morning. Bad data. So again, the legacy system could be really messy. It could be really difficult to get the data out. It's time consuming. It gets overcomplicated quickly, as we've mentioned. And again, if you haven't got the right expertise in the business to deal with your data, then say so. Let's think about how we can help in that area. There are others. We work with partners, etc. It's not all down to you guys to do that if you just don't have the personnel to do what's needed with the data. Timescale changes. Another pitfall to try and avoid are training sessions. They may take longer than planned. Everything's great with a plan, but the reality kicks in. The day job happens. Somebody turns up sick. The day job gets in the way. The homework's not done. It's not done for the next session, which means it gets put back. These are all real life things, and we do deal with them every single day, pretty much. But they can be mitigated. They can probably not be avoided, but again, the plan can change. We can be flexible so that it shouldn't impact the timescales too much. Clearly, data taking too longer than expected. So again, as long as we've got contingency in the time, in the budget, we can hopefully absorb those timeline changes to avoid this pitfall. Assumptions. So, expectations maybe aren't understood at the beginning of the project. Okay, assumptions are made during the sessions, but maybe aren't clarified. Is everybody singing from the same song sheet or not? Again, that's why it's really clear. We don't just have a sales handover internally with our guys. We want to hear from the customer how they need the system to run, because there'll be assumptions made there without having that clear, transparent conversation with the customer at the very beginning. Actions aren't documented or understood, so they're just left, and no one has a plan about it, and no one's keeping on top of people doing their actions. And responsibilities are not set out, and they're not clear about who's doing what on both sides, customers and ours. Misinterpretation is the fifth one. Terminology is not clear. You know, finance systems do the same thing. They have to, you know, but they might do things differently. They may call something slightly different. Each industry calls things something slightly different. So let's just ensure, and it's okay to go, do you know what, can you just recap? I'm not quite understanding what that means in the implicit world. So just explain to me again what you mean by that process. Just making sure that those misunderstandings are ironed out, and you just question backwards and forwards until the understanding is completely clear. Reporting, it's a big area that's misinterpreted. Customers live and die by their reports they're currently using. They call it something. iplicit has a slightly different way of doing something. And so as long as we are clear about the report requirements, there's a report specification for each one that's created. Again, not too onerous, but it just details out exactly what that report needs to do, how it needs to be delivered to people. And again, that communication is clear, so nothing is misunderstood. Communication, fundamental throughout the whole project life cycle, so that again, those misunderstandings, questions are all able to be put to each other, and everybody knows where they are. And finally, point number 6 is poor planning. So hopefully after what I've just waffled on for about 20 odd minutes, you know, it is all about the planning. It's all about the communication. It's all about making sure that the timescales are kept where appropriate or adapted. And if a go live has to be put back, then so be it. And it's discussed early and it's agreed. So again, the main points really is not giving enough time internally for your homework, not blocking out diary for the UAT, and not including the right people in the sessions and having to recap on the same sessions because of poor planning. So that summarises, I think, the key points we feel that do need to be considered when you're implementing a new accounting system, or any system for that matter. Hopefully you found that really useful, and I think it's now over to some questions.
It is indeed. I know we've had quite a few questions come through. Luke's been managing those as we go in. So we've still got a bit of time left. Do you want to start running through, Luke, on some of those questions that have come through, please?
Thank you, Guy. Yes, the first one is, what happens to my historical data?
Okay, yeah, so obviously I've talked about the live data, haven't I? And I've talked about having a nice clean system to start iplicit with, and to start your new journey on the new system. But clearly your legacy system has data in it, right? So there are options, and you know, what everybody else goes and thinks, right, okay, well, I'll get a year or two's worth of data in iplicit, and I will, you know, make sure that I've just got to compromise now on my chart of accounts and my customers, suppliers, because actually I'm not going to use them anymore, but I need them. Well, you don't actually. We've got an archive facility that can take any number of years worth of data historically, and we actually migrate them into a separate archive table. So what you can have is a nice clean system in our live tables, as we call it, that you can move forward with, and archive tables can look back. And they're pretty much like description only transactions. Of course, there are over sales, purchase, nominal, projects, but they can be reported on, but they can be searched on, but they're just held in a separate database. And so as long as you can get the data out of your legacy system, we should be able to migrate those into our archive tables. We've got various templates. Again, every system is different that we migrate from. And so we've got an archive facility, if you like, for each of those common legacy systems that we work with. So again, we should be able to take care of the historical without impacting on your new shiny clean system.
Thanks, Sam. I think you've answered this one already, but it has come in, so just to cover it off. How much time would you say a typical implementation would take?
Yeah, so as I say, on average, we go with a 3-month implementation plan, approximately 16 days, and those are split between project management, obviously the data migration. So if you do want to bring your history over, then there's obviously extra time needed for that, because data migration in its own right with the live information obviously is quite time consuming. So you'd need to add on a little bit of extra time for the historical stuff if you need that to come over. Config and training, report writing, and obviously then if people are happy to up for us to help with their go live support. So, allow 3 months. Clearly, again, I suppose I haven't mentioned it, a typical myth is you don't go live on the first of the month, right? So you're already closing your previous system off. You're probably going live in maybe week 2 of a month. You might close off the end of October, probably not go live to the middle of November. So, I would allow, it's 3 months for us to really be that 30, 60, 90 days, but probably for yourself to be really happy that the implementation, you've done your management pack for the first time. I'd probably allow the sort of 4-month process end to end.
Brilliant. And the last question, unless any more come in, of course, is how quickly could I start my project?
Okay, so we do aim to get that project kickoff meeting booked in and happening really within about 2 weeks from a signed order. Obviously, that is availability dependent on both sides and holidays, etc. Summertime, you probably might need to wait a little bit longer. But, we do really try to have that initial meeting done within 2 weeks. Shortly after that, the document, the PID as we call it, is then given to yourself as a draft to run through what was spoken about in the meeting, and then we create your first environment and start config. So really it is quite a quick implementation from signed order. Obviously allows us then from that to hit our sort of 3 month, 4 month. So yeah, probably within about 2 weeks you'll be sat in front of one of my project guys.
Excellent. Thanks, Sam. That's all of the questions.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you both. So that draws today's session to conclusion. If you do need any more help and advice, we're around. You can go to iplicit.com for any more details. We've got a project section in there as well with some resources that you can take a look at. And you also find some downloads in the GoToWebinar handouts area. If you've not found those already, there's a copy of the slides. There's some implementation checklists and some example documentation that we've got from some of our project plans. You're free to download if you want to. Download those if you would like to. And you can also at iplicit.com speak to us. You can book any personalized demonstrations or just a discovery session with Luke or one of the team. Luke's contact details are there. We'll also, we've recorded today's session. Later on, you'll get a link through if you need to rewatch, or if you'd like to rewatch, if you'd like to catch up on anything. And also if you want to share the webinar with any of your colleagues as well, you're free to do so. Apart from that, thank you all very much for your time and attention. Thank you, Sam and Luke. If you need to go to iplicit.com, you can also find out what webinars we're running next. We run 2 or 3 of these every month, so feel free to take a look at the archive or join our next session. We'll be happy to see you there. Apart from that, thank you all very much for your time and attention. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.